Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today, we are going to be talking about the 2025 Scorecard for America's Infrastructure. This is prepared annually by the American Society of Civil Engineers, or ASCE, and they actually go through and they rate 18 different categories of infrastructure and assign them actually a letter grade. And we're going to focus mainly on drinking water because that's what we do here. But they really look at 18 categories. We'll look at that briefly here in a little bit. But mainly our focus here is on drinking water, as it always is. So, really, spoiler alert is the aging infrastructure out there really is not faring well, and we are lagging behind in our infrastructure investment. And probably, I think you can safely say that small water districts usually have more of a struggle in this area is to keep up with infrastructure improvements, capital investment, and those types of things. But even the larger districts really struggle with this too, it's chronically underfunded as it is in most areas of infrastructure in the country. So we're going to dive into this report. Like I say, we're mainly going to focus on the drinking water aspects. I'll provide a link to the actual report uh, at the end of the show, so you can download that, and I'll include that in the show notes as well, so you can download it and look at it in more detail because we're gonna skim through it. There's a lot of information here, and so I want you to be able to download it and look at it. So let's start off here, and this is actually what the report looks like here. I'm going to go through the intro here, and then we will dive into the actual uh, uh, specifics on the drinking water infrastructure. So this is what the report looks like. You can download this. It is free and it's available online. Like I say, I'll give you the link. ASCE produces this every year. The table of contents, you can see here that really they break out 18 different categories from aviation to wastewater. Drinking water is in here. And so that's what our focus is going to be. And so there's an introduction we go through here, and they're really laying the groundwork here is why the infrastructure is important. And we all know that, of course, that are in the industry. And we all know that we are chronically underinvested in this area. So really they're stating the obvious here, and that's kind of where we go through. But I wanted to look at some of the areas that they focus on in the introduction. They're really prioritizing resilience. We've seen a lot of obviously hurricanes, earthquakes, things like that have disrupted our infrastructure. And so the focus being on resilience is really important. Now, it's probably no secret here that for folks that follow the show that I'm a big proponent of asset management plans and think that everything pretty well revolves around an asset management plan, and really resilience can be built into your asset management plan and the subsequent capital investment plan as well. So resilience is important. Of course, we really need to make sure we're maintaining and replacing assets on schedule, and we're actually lagging behind in that area as well. So this is important here, and as we shift to resilience, is making sure we got everything in hand as it is, so we can keep operating as it were and get it funded, and then really start looking for the future and shifting our focus to resilience as we get the immediate priorities under control. So um, they talk a little bit about the American Society of Civil Engineers here, but let's get into key findings here and the overall grade for infrastructure in the U.S., and that includes all 18 categories, is a C. So fairly pitiful. We are seeing some improvement here. They do say that some of the D and D minus categories really are moving upwards a little bit. So some of the investment is actually improving, and we're making some progress. The federal government has invested. The American Recovery Program has invested a bunch, and are going to stress the need in here for continual improvement and continual funding by Congress to keep getting these loans and grants to improve our infrastructure. So let's look at some of the key findings. I've highlighted them in yellow here. They looked at the 18 infrastructure categories, and really number one here, aging infrastructure systems are increasingly vulnerable to natural disasters and extreme weather events, creating unexpected and often avoidable risks to public safety and the economy. And so they're really stressing the resilience component here, is what it comes down to. And we have seen, a number of hurricanes like out here in Tennessee. We had in North Carolina. We just had in Helene, really wiped out a lot of stuff that's they're still recovering on that, and so we can see how infrastructure really is slow to recover from this because they're not designed for resilience. They don't have plans in place for any of these disasters. Now, sometimes the disasters happen and there's no amount of planning can really mitigate things entirely, but being able to respond and get things back online, at least to a minimal extent, is really what's important in the resilience category. So they're going to stress doing resilience planning and making sure your system is going to be resilient and be able to withstand to the extent possible some of these natural disasters. So they talk about climate change and all that type of stuff, which I'm not a big believer in. You go through cycles, but the mere fact is you can have a hurricane, and whether it's climate change caused or not, it can still do the significant damage, and you got to be prepared for that. If you're in earthquake-prone part of the country, you need to be prepared for that. Floods, you need to be prepared for that. So there's a certain amount of planning you can do. So the resilience component is actually very important because clean water, the drinking water, is going to be hugely important because that's where illness can spread during times of natural disasters. So getting people clean water is going to be very important. All right. So number two, recent federal and state investments have had a positive impact, but the full force of increased funding will take years to realize. And obviously, rebuilding infrastructure when you're so far behind just takes time, and it takes a lot of money, and government funding obviously moves slowly. I mean, they try to get the money out there, they provided the funding, and just going through the application process, verifying everything, it just takes a lot of time, and that's just a feature of government funding. So it's what you got to live with, and you need to plan around that. So sustained investment is key to providing certainty and ensuring planning goes into development, as well as making larger infrastructure projects attainable. So none of the stop-start stuff. They're making a case here for Congress, both the federal level and the state level, to keep funding infrastructure improvements on a regular basis and keep that funding moving forward instead of stop, start. That is the worst thing that can happen is if you are counting on grants and you're not getting them, and you don't have the capital to invest in your system, then you're relying on these grants and loans, and they can be hard to come by if there's not consistent funding. So they're making the case for that. And they also point out the demands on infrastructure systems have intensified, not just from maintenance and from aging infrastructure, but also growth. We've had a lot of growth in certain parts of the country. I know here in Tennessee, we've seen a lot of growth, and that's that's important to take into account too, and that's going to provide strain too. How do you provide water service to new parts of the county that are developing? They're throwing up all these residential subdivisions. How do you provide them with water and get the lines out there and source the water? So it's important to take that into consideration, and a lot of smaller water utilities do not have good plans for growth, and they kind of throw up their hands a lot of times, and you kind of got to work hand in hand to make sure that's provided for. So, and lastly, here in this component, they look at sustained investment at current or higher funding levels, and I think they're arguing for the higher funding levels will be necessary for infrastructure to continue to improve. Um, they also point out here in number 3 that unreliable, unavailable data. So they're looking at data reliability for making these assessments. And, I think probably some of the larger utilities do report these things. Small to medium sized water utilities it's kind of hit or miss whether they report that or not. So really doing these assessments is a little tricky because you don't always have the data. So they point that out as well. Is evaluating progress in these areas is can be kind of challenging. So here is the methodology, and I think this is important to look at. Is there's the key areas that they looked at in developing the scorecard. So number 1 is capacity, condition, funding, future needs, operation and maintenance. That's going to be a huge component. And once again, that's where your asset management plan is going to come into play. Public safety. A lot of infrastructure is related to public safety, and that is an important component. And resilience, they throw that, we've kind of beat up on that a little bit here, and innovation. So we'll talk about that a little bit too, because innovation is interesting because we're seeing some sea changes in the technology out there where some of these innovations and changes are becoming even accessible to some of the smallest water utilities out there. I'll just take the example of predictive maintenance. You doing AI-based predictive maintenance, that can be done to the smallest water utilities. And you can put together that program, and that's going to save you substantially in the long run. Instead of doing the proactive or the reactive maintenance, you're now doing predictive maintenance. You're staying ahead of the game, and that is going to help a lot. But that technology and those innovative technologies are becoming increasingly accessible to even the smallest water district, and they need a little training and some hand holding, I guess you could say, to move forward in that area and implement those things. But the cost of implementing these things is fairly inexpensive. GIS, you take somebody like Diamond Maps out there, $20 a month to do some of these really small systems. There's no excuse not to do this because the costs are well within reach. It's just a matter of learning and implementing the technology here. So those are the areas they look at to come up with the scorecard. Here is the 18 areas they looked at. Drinking water is among them. Drinking water got a C minus. So you can see probably the best ports, it got a B, which was the best. Rail got a B minus, which kind of surprises me. And we range down to there are no D minuses, but we do have a few D's down here. Stormwater, transit, a lot of D pluses and C's. So you can see there are So we got a few that are in the B's. There are no A's, and I think we're a long ways off from that. But you can see that it's fairly universal that we're having some challenges in infrastructure investment in this country. All right, so investment pays. There is investment needs. They looked at actually the 10-year gaps with They did a study, gaps with continue to act scenario. So this is basically continuing to fund things. So we look over here, drinking water is off to the right here. So the total needs is about $1.7 trillion. Um, the anticipated investment about $655 billion. So we're basically just $1 trillion short on the 10-year needs in drinking water infrastructure. That's a big number. That's going to take a lot to overcome that. And you're seeing similar needs elsewhere. For instance, surface transportation needs 1.2 trillion. Some of these aren't quite so much. Water transportation, 13 billion. Energy, it's up there around 600 billion. So there are some shortfalls, but drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater are kind of lumped together in this category, are about $1 trillion short of where they need to be over the next 10 years. So overall, in infrastructure in this country, we're looking at a gap of $3.7 trillion in investment in America's infrastructure. Those are some big numbers, actually, that is going to be hard to make up. All right, so cumulative infrastructure needs, just basically looking at drinking water, the needs for drinking water alone, $670 billion. Basically, based on the information that ASCE was able to collect, there's about $361 billion that's planning to be invested. So the funding gap over 10 years for drinking water alone is about $309 billion. So, and you can see here's where those really big numbers come in when you total everything up in all the categories. Recommendations to raise the grade. What they're looking at is continued and in some cases, and I would say in all cases, increased investment. So you're going to have more money being invested. And I would argue that a lot of small water utilities out there aren't doing the minimum necessary to even keep their head above water, and they really need to start looking at that. So that's one of the things to think about here. So. And they talk again about resilience. They're really pounding the resilience in here. They want to sustain investment, and this is keeping the money flowing. This is good from state and federal. So, but I highlighted a few of those. We're not going to go through everything here, but I got some in yellow that I highlighted that infrastructure owners and operators must charge rates reflecting the true cost of using, maintaining, and improving infrastructure. This is a real common problem in the water industry, is that we don't charge rates that are reflective of our capital and operating needs. So capital investment plans are pretty thin because the rates don't support it. You can go out there and you can apply for grants, you can apply for loans, but basically you got to have enough there to meet your basic needs, and the rate structure really needs to reflect that. So people really need to reflect and have a rate structure that that really takes into account what their capital needs are and their operating needs, and they need to understand those numbers. That's where where the asset management plan and the capital improvement plan come in, because that's going to be the basis of what your needs are, your defined needs over the next 5 years, and then you need to have a rate structure that reflects that. And you can't always count on getting these grants. It's nice if you can get a grant. More likely, you're going to be looking at state revolving fund loan, things like that. So those still need to be paid back with interest. So so you're going to need some capital there to pay for those things. It can bridge the gap, but really ultimately, what you want is your rate structure to be able to support your operations and your capital investments. So, also, project owners should include life cycle costs associated with planning, financing, designing, constructing, operating, maintaining, and decommissioning projects to properly evaluate the full infrastructure cost and need to plan for the total cost over a project's lifespan. So, life cycle costs, our goal is always to minimize those, but in order to do that, you need to have proper planning, you need to have an asset management plan, and you need to have proper planning so you understand what those life cycle costs are because the goal is to minimize those while keeping up with everything. So you need to do the proper investment, but you want to spend your money wisely and minimize those life cycle costs. All right. So resilience, they're really pushing this here, encouraging asset management practice to ensure investments are spent wisely. Once again, going back to our asset management plans, they are really the core of a water utility. A lot of small water utilities do not have good asset management plans. And if they do, they don't use them properly. So we really promote the use of a good asset management plan. And it's really something that you got to spend some time with and really develop a good one that you use on a regular basis. And it's basically going to be your guiding document. So, prioritizing projects that improve the sustainability, safety, and security of systems and communities to ensure continued reliability and enhanced resilience. So, this goes back to our asset management too, our level of service that we want to provide to our customers because ultimately we're providing service to our customers. We want to maintain that level of service. That is a component in our asset management plan. Um, Advanced policy and innovation. So I'm going to hit a couple highlights here. Assess current government permitting processes, identify pain points, and inform strategies to modernize compliance across infrastructure sectors, working on parallels rather than series while ensuring appropriate safeguards and protections are in place. So, I would just add to this or simplify it a little bit is that try to get rid of the red tape. We got to work to get rid of the red tape in government in the permitting these projects because it really causes things to drag out. So, and trying to do projects and getting this funding so you can do projects in parallel instead of sequentially is going to be important to moving things forward. And lastly, leverage proven and emerging technologies to make the best use of limited financial and personnel resources. This is where things like AI can come in and not necessarily to replace workers, but to make our workers more efficient. And I used the example earlier of predictive maintenance. This is something that AI can help you with. It can help you analyze your data. A lot of times, small water utilities collect this data, they look at it, they throw it in a filing cabinet, they never use it again. When it can be used to actually plan things out, like your asset management plan, your regulatory compliance, and a lot of different components. So it needs to, you develop that data, you spent the money to develop that data, so you use that data. So we call that data driven decision making. And you can take that data and you can put it in useful form. That's an innovative use. You can tie that to AI. And like I say, these technologies are well within the grasp of small water utilities these days. All right. So with that, let me switch over to our next. This is just a short video. There's really no sound here. I think there's some background music maybe, but we're just going to play this and it gives you a quick rundown on some of the key components of this report. All right. So let's get into some of the report itself. This is the online version, so this is what I'm going to be going through here, and it's broken. It's basically picking out the highlights, and we're going through it that way. Um, so here's a summary. They go through and basically. The key phrase here at the beginning is the nation's water infrastructure is aging and underfunded. So we know that to be the case. It can vary from big water districts who are fairly well funded to small water districts that are chronically underfunded. So um, the big thing that a lot of people are focused on now is replacing the lead service lines, and there are some EPA deadlines for that, and so that's a big focus right now. PFAS treatment is another big focus. So those two things are really sucking up a lot of capital right now. But there's so many other areas that just keeping up with replacing valves and other infrastructure is really important. So let's this is a little bit of the background here. So you can see basically 2 million miles of underground pipes are operated by nearly 150,000 public water systems. So um, that's pretty big. So approximately 70% of water utilities have a pipe replacement program, indicating utilities are taking a proactive approach to replacing aging water lines. However, I will say that non-revenue water, or basically leaks in non-revenue waters, industry parlance for leaks, is a huge component that a lot of people are constantly talking about, and how do you deal with this, and so non-revenue water becomes a big deal, and a lot of that goes back to repairing and replacing infrastructure as you need it. So these distribution lines and water mains, you need to replace them as needed, um, and track down the leaks and fix them. So that's really where we're at there. So let's scroll down here. You can see that some of the highlights here. Um, the U.S. loses the equivalent of over 50 million Olympic-sized swimming pool water every year. That's non-revenue water. That's the leaks we're talking about. It's a huge problem, and a lot of people spend a lot of money dealing with this. And it is, when you have all your pipes buried, and a lot of these leaks don't necessarily surface, it gets to be quite challenging. And there are some innovative technologies that are coming out now. Some of them are a little more expensive, focusing on satellite technology for finding leaks, but some of these are proving to be a step forward and pretty effective, where people can justify the cost. So between fiscal years 2022 and 2023, Congress reallocated more than $1 billion from the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund for congressionally designated projects or earmarks. So some money coming out of there. And then American drinking water systems require more than $625 billion over the next 20 years to reach a state of good repair. I would say that number is probably a little bit on the low side. So condition and capacity. So drinking water infrastructure in the U.S. consists of more than 2 million miles of underground transmission and distribution lines. Some of the nation's oldest pipes were laid in the 19th century, and pipes laid post World War II have an average lifespan of 75 to 100 years, meaning that many of even the newer pipe segments are reaching or have reached the end of their design life. Yet a lot of a lot of utilities do not have a good plan to replace these on a regular basis. So this is where you start developing a lot of leaks. You get a lot of non-revenue water that then affects your operating funds and your capital funds. So condition and capacity. Let's look at that here. Um, so drinking water, like we said, 2 million miles of underground transmission and distribution lines. Um, it's it points out the how important it is to public health and safety. Um, so a 2018 study found that approximately 39 billion gallons of water per day were withdrawn from surface water or groundwater sources for public supply between 2000 and 2015. However, a 2024 reanalysis showed that the initial estimate did not fully account for growing populations in urban centers served by public water systems. So we're actually that number was actually understated. So there's a lot of water being moved, going through a lot of pipes. These pipes are not being maintained. So there is the C minus that you get. All right. So moving on to funding. Water utilities primarily pay to operate and maintain water infrastructure through user rates. And we talked about the rate infrastructure and how it generally doesn't keep up with what your actual needs are. That's where the asset management plan, the capital improvement plan comes in. It should be married to your rate structure. That should provide the basis for setting your rates because your capital and operating needs are going to drive what your rates need to be. And most small water utilities are reluctant to raise rates, and they have not done a good rate study where they know what their rates actually need to be. This is very important because if you don't have enough money coming in to maintain your system, then you got to cut corners somewhere, and that is where a lot of the aging infrastructure come in from deferred maintenance because that's where you save money is by deferring maintenance, kicking the can down the road until you start getting these critical and catastrophic breaks that need to be fixed, and those are more expensive to fix than maintaining things. But you got to strike the balance somewhere, and deferred maintenance seems to be where they end up saving money because they don't have enough capital to do the adequate maintenance. So um, only 20% of water utilities reported being able to cover the cost of drinking water services. So that means that 80% are chronically underfunded. So these are this is some a little bit more detail here, so you can see that there is water money that is being redirected, and so they're stealing money from money that should be going into the investment. So we really need to change that and turn the tide here. So um, this is important. So we talked a little bit about the numbers here. I'm gonna keep moving on here. So um, future needs. You can see the chart here. So we're seeing this is actually the breakdown here, distribution and transmission, $420.8 billion. So a lot of that's in those lines that are potentially leaking. Storage, uh, uh, 55 billion, 29 billion for source water, um, treatment, 106 billion, and other is basically 18 billion. So you can see that the lion's share of the investment need is to replace and repair and upgrade distribution and transmission lines. So that's where our money, most of the money, needs to go. So um, that's very very important to take into account. And I think that most water utilities will tell you that's probably where most of their money goes and where most of their maintenance goes, and where most of their operators are out there taking care of things. It's probably doing valves, and I count valves with the distribution and transmission lines, and so valves and pipes is really where they're spending most of their time. All right, operation maintenance. Water utilities are taking steps to improve responsiveness to maintenance challenges, but once again, the personnel A lot of small water utilities, a lot of people wearing a lot of different hats. So keeping maintenance done, I mean, there's some talk, different places talk about, well, you really need to have a dedicated maintenance crew and stuff. That just isn't in the cards for a lot of small water utilities. So people are wearing multiple hats, and that's just the reality of the situation. That may work for bigger water districts, but here's the deal. So industry guidelines encourage 65% scheduled to 35% reactive maintenance. Uh, from 2015 to 2023, the portion of utilities that improved their ability to track planned to reactive maintenance ratio has increased from 37 to 42%. So this is good. So you're moving. Generally, what you want to do these days is what we look at is it's generally been reactive maintenance. So something breaks, you go out and fix it. Proactive maintenance or planned maintenance is really what happens when you start assessing what things may fail and go out and overhaul them and maintain them ahead of time. And basically it's usually based on some time of lifespan and things like that. Now we get into using AI for things like predictive maintenance, and now we can predict based on the condition, the lifespan, and other factors. We can start to prioritize things using predictive maintenance to predict when they might fail. And then we go back to our asset management plan, and we're looking at likelihood of failure is an important component there, but also prioritizing things through consequence of failure. So looking at likelihood of failure and consequence of failure together, that's where we we get into the predictive maintenance component, and that's really going to save, especially small water utilities, a lot of money here. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail here. Um, water utilities are improving in this area, and like it says, 70% have a pipe replacement program, but is that adequate? So there's a difference between having a pipe replacement program and having an adequate pipe replacement program or a proactive pipe replacement program. So, um, so that's a key finding here. Um, Asset management serves as a valuable tool to minimize costs of owning and operating infrastructure systems while meeting customer needs. Asset management plans can help improve decision making to benefit ratepayers and communities. Many states require utilities to implement asset management plans as a condition of receiving public funds, but no such federal requirement exists. I can tell you here in Tennessee is that if you're going to receive ARP funds, if you're going to receive state revolving funds, you need to have an asset management plan. Now, I will say there's a difference between meeting the state requirements to have an asset management plan and actually using that asset management plan. That is the next step. So that's important. Is asset management plans, and I'll talk that one to death because they are that important. So, public safety. Um, uh, um, Actually, we're operating under the Safe Drinking Water Act. In 2022, only 4% of public water systems reported violations of a health-based drinking water standard where a contaminant was detected that exceeded allowable limits of water treatment requirements were not met, roughly equal to 2020 and 2021. Now, I will say that small water systems tend to have more violations than bigger water systems, and that's due to people wearing multiple hats and running different directions and deferred maintenance. There's a lot of different factors in that. So smaller water systems disproportionately have more violations, and the record proves that. So so it's important in that regard as well. And there's actually a lot of pressure on in certain places like California, for instance, really push hard to consolidate some of these really small water systems with bigger water systems just because of the problems they have with with compliance and those other areas. So you may see that in other states as well. So um, resilience and innovation. Like I say, this report is really pushing the resilience, and I think we've kind of covered that pretty well. But the innovation is one area I'm really pushing on. Is asset management plans have been around for quite a while, but we can get more innovative with those and how we do things and make them meaningful and make them tools that we use. Um, you really need to look at them on a regular basis. Don't just prepare one, submit it to the state, and not use it. It should be the focus of your planning, and it should be updated. Capital improvement plans and asset management plans need to be updated regularly. And I would say that at least annually, but I would say probably semi-annually or quarterly, they really need to be looked at. So if you have a board of directors for your water system, it really needs to be a regular part of your reporting to your directors. What's going on with the asset management plan, the capital improvement plan should be a part of every meeting so that they can make informed decisions. So let's look at that real quick, see if there's anything good here. So uh, 2023, only 72% of utilities had implemented or were in the process of preparing risk and resilience assessments. Um, risk management plan can really be part, and an emergency response plan can really be part of your asset management plan too. So, or tied into that. So that's important. So, um, lastly, nationwide utilities are embracing the greater use of digital technology and data-driven decision making. Like we said, in 2023, 43% of utilities plan to install new IT systems for water treatment or update existing systems, and 45% plan to install or update digital meter reading systems. So you can even, for small water systems that have like a minimal SCADA, it's really easy to update those things so you can take data from your SCADA system, put it into spreadsheets. You can then use that to do predictive maintenance. So you can draw these numbers here very easily. You can automate these things and basically get the predictive maintenance and track things much more easily than you ever could before. So that's where innovation comes in. All right, I think that is most of it. Let's talk about what they say for raising the grade, solutions that work. So increase the number of states that require asset management plans for drinking water utilities and create or expand state funding mechanisms to support the development and implementation of asset management plans. Once again, number one component, asset management plans, very, very important. Um, Expanded and more sustained grant funding for public utilities for PFAS. That's a big deal. The line replacement, the lead line replacements, another big funding area. Um, and this is what I was talking about earlier. Efforts should be made to merge smaller public water systems to expand ratepayer bases, thereby providing a greater ability to meet water utility demand. So there is pressure on from various places to consolidate smaller water systems to make them more efficient. um, Enforce the requirement that all drinking water utilities complete risk and resilience assessments um, per America's Water Infrastructure Act. Continue to prioritize funding and assistance for removing and replacing lead service lines. That is ongoing. Provide federal support for monitoring and removal of PFAS from public systems. So once again, going back to the PFAS is really consuming a lot of attention these days, and treatment for PFAS, because it's everywhere, is relatively expensive. We're going to see that come down as more people implement these different technologies, but it is a capital investment for a lot of systems that that need to do that. So develop and fund affordability programs to ensure low income and vulnerable communities do not bear a disproportionate burden of rate increases. Increase federal and local support to recruit, train, and retain the next generation of drinking water sector workforce to help offset expected retirements. This is a big deal. We haven't really talked about it too much here, but it's a big deal. The silver tsunami, they call it, because a lot of people are aging out, not enough young people coming into the business. And so we really need to have the next generation of water system operators coming in. So, and finally, direct an annual appropriation of $3.4 billion to the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program and ensure congressionally directed spending for community projects does not reduce the amounts made available for states. So, keeping that grant funding and loan programs funded is very important to keep things moving forward, because catching up with the aging infrastructure and getting to where we need to be, we saw there's some big numbers being bandied about. $660 billion, I think is what we talked about, just basically to get to where we need to go. And I think that's probably understating things, but that's really kind of where we're at. So anyway, that's a summary of the report. The link is below here. I'll put it in the show notes. And that is our show for today. Thanks for joining us. I hope this was meaningful. And once again, it's really important to properly invest in our infrastructure in this country. And we focused here on drinking water, but it's really important to look at the highways and wastewater and everything else out there, because there's aging infrastructure all around us. So drinking water is our focus here, but and there's a lot that needs to be done there. So until next time, thank you very much, and we will we'll do some more videos next time, and got some interesting videos coming up for you. So see you next time.